Welcome. This is the Health and Wellness Coach Journal podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jessica Singh, the founder and CEO of the Center for Health and Wellness Coaches. This is a podcast for coaches to explore topics related to health, wellness, and coaching, sharing knowledge and sharing light. Welcome. In this episode, I have the privilege of speaking with Christine Rose. Christine Rose isn't just an internationally best-selling author, speaker, and an award-winning, top-certified business and executive coach who inspires audiences to create their best future by design. She's also a person with lived trauma experiences who is committed to furthering her own well-being and the well-being of our community and world. And she's a past or current client of healthcare providers, coaches, and wellness providers like you. Christine is the founder of CEO Excel, a new virtual learning community for CEOs of greater than $1 million revenue companies, and of Christine Rose Coaching and Consulting, a business coaching firm based in the Seattle-Tacoma area in Washington State in the United States, helping business owners grow leadership, effective and innovative teams, and high-value companies since 2015. She's an ICF Professional Certified Coach, a member of Forbes Coaches Council, a Canfield Certified Trainer, Certified Value Builder Advisor, Certified Psychological Safety Coach, and Certified Core Values Coach. When not coaching, writing, or speaking, Christine serves on advisory boards focused on homelessness prevention and mentoring minority and women business owners, and enjoys travel and time with loved ones. Christine, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be with you, Jessica.
I was so excited to get to meet you and to discuss about the impact of Me Too in coaching for coaches, and to discuss your book, which I am a complete fan of, Life Beyond MeToo, Creating a Safer World for Our Mothers, Daughters, Sisters, and Friends. You're the first coach I've ever met who's ventured into the space of discussing the Me Too movement, sexual violence, harassment, and trauma from the perspective of a coach. And I'd love to know what inspired your work.
Yeah, so if we look back and remember in 2017 how Me Too took over media, it really created a huge awareness opportunity. And I actually have been through and have my own Me Too stories, and I had been reflecting on something I had been reading by one of my mentors, Bob Dunham, in a book he wrote called The Innovator's Way. And there's a story there. I mean, there's a kind of a chapter in there about dealing with intransigent messes. And I see this whole issue as being a huge mess that we haven't been able to solve. And there's not even agreement that we need to solve it yet. And so I just thought, what I know about coaching is that it's a highly effective tool for creating change and for creating a future. And having studied coaching and been working in coaching now for 9 years, I saw at the time, I saw that, what if we started having some coaching conversations around this topic and just created safety and an opportunity for people to have conversations that could lead to change. So that's why I decided to go ahead and write the book.
It is so well researched, holistic, and eye-opening. And I know you have a lot of experience with large corporations and small businesses. And for me, just coming from a healthcare background, I felt like this should be required reading for anyone working with anyone for health and wellness.
Well, thank you. And I hope more people can hear about it. And I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about why you think that in this book, in this podcast today.
Yeah, and same. It's just, holistically, it's so interesting because we always talk about across gender, closing a gender gap, equal rights for women, and then actually in your book going through the nuances of how it shows up. What are the actual gaps in salary? What are the traumas that mostly women, although men experience too, go through? And the biggest part about this that was so refreshing was what are our own perspectives about this? How comfortable do I feel having these conversations? Do we feel having them with our colleagues? And how often do we suppress them for any reason? And so that was really eye-opening to me, especially as a coach, because to walk that talk and to have that self-awareness requires so much, and your book really shed light on it for me too, and just advocating for equality in so many ways I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, it's really important as a coach and as a wellness professional, for those listening to think about uh, ourselves and what we've been through because we're whole people, right? And we bring all of ourselves into our work, whether we want to or not. And so if we have addressed our own personal stories and recognize the impact in our own lives, it helps to create an awareness for us and it helps to create integrity in our service to others. So I could not have written this book if I hadn't done all sorts of counseling and worked with wellness professionals and worked with actually a coach. And there's a big difference between coaching and counseling and an ethical kind of a standard to meet there that we can talk about. But I've had to work through my own things. So, what I don't want to see wellness professionals doing is using unhealed trauma as a point of service for clients, or n- trying to use resources where there hasn't been some real thought given to how am I creating safety? How does the author or the source of this resource create safety for the people using it, whether it's the wellness professional or the client that you're serving, because we don't want to we don't want to further the damage that people go through.
Very well said, especially to have that trauma, whether it is, any kind of healthcare provider, knowing when to refer to a psychiatrist or a counselor or a therapist, or if it's as a coach, if this is a clientele that you want to work with, a population to serve, actually going through that formal trauma informed training to have that trauma awareness and really knowing the scope of practice, like you were saying, to do no harm. And that was one of the things when I read your book, I was like, wow, she's a coach. She's talking about Me Too so candidly and so openly. Like, am I allowed to do that? I didn't know I could share. And exactly what you said, knowing when to share appropriately, if it is appropriate, or even just holding that psychological safe space for someone else to share and being part of that healing process is so wonderful. And that was one of the most empowering things about your book.
And we do want to be careful if we haven't had some understanding of the practice of trauma informed coaching or trauma informed care. And so, for those listening, we want a clear understanding of how past trauma can show up in a client's current situation in their life, because we are whole people. And if you're familiar with The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Vessel van der Kolk, uh, and the kind of training that you can get through that, that's just an example. But trauma can show up, and so if you're a wellness coach dealing with someone, say for example with recurring uh, eating disorders or recurring self-harm disorders, um, first of all, we want to be clear that behaviors and practices that clients have can be trauma induced or trauma triggered. And so we want to understand, oh, here's something I'm seeing. And as we've done the trauma informed coach training or the trauma informed care training, we understand, oh, this is where they're coming from. So let me accept them as the whole person that they are. And let me create choice for them in this space. And let's take away misunderstanding and any judgment, and really kind of really know that, hey, we have to come from a place of creating that safety, um, and also knowing that what your limits are as a professional. So you may want to really take a look at your profession's code of ethics and standards. If you're not clear about how far you can engage in a conversation with someone, um, or where you should take a conversation, because whether you're in a coaching practice or in a therapy practice or in a wellness advisory practice, we're in conversations, right? And so understanding the limits of what's ethical in my practice really matters. Um, those are all things to think about.
Yes, and also the code of ethics is such a benefit of working for anyone who is working with a coach, again, working with a certified coach, because the International Coaching Federation, the National Board for Health and Wellness Coaching, and other large credentialing bodies have code of ethics, and those are so important to follow, to make sure, again, that we are not doing harm.
If you're a new coach and you're listening to this and you love wellness and decided to become a wellness coach, and you got a certification from somebody, but it's not a part of a global board or even a national standards board, what you want to recognize as a coach is that we're present based and future focused. So our conversations are helping our clients to recognize the truth of where they are, envision where they want to be, and bridge the gap. And we partner with them to creatively come up with their path to bridge the gap. When they start having they start having breakdowns in the conversation where maybe there's a lot of emotion, we want to hold the space for that. But if there's work regarding trauma healing, regarding looking in the past, kind of digging into the past to figure out how to heal what they're holding, that's a counseling role. That's not a coach role. So if you're not clear on what the limits are of your role, I really encourage you to check out International Coaching Federation or other uh, bodies of practice that have ethical standards, and get really clear on what's okay for you to be engaged in versus what could actually trigger or do worse harm.
Very well said. And even with knowing the role and staying within the scope of practice, it is still so important for coaches, obviously, as you wrote this book, to be aware of our own perceptions towards sexual discrimination and gender violence. For me, intuitively, when I think of health and wellness coaching, it's interesting because in medical education and training, and then as a health and wellness coach, we are aware of chronic diseases, though the scope of a coach is not to provide diagnosis or treatment. We are aware of mental health illnesses, and substance abuse, and when to refer. But I have actually not seen anyone talk about openly or an assessment for sexual violence and sexual trauma, and even the use, respectively, of listening or to music, to media that objectifies women, and how this impacts health and our own self-images, and what we think of each other and ourselves, and addressing our own biases towards them. So as a coach, I'd love to know where you feel like this work comes in most handy for a coach to raise their own self-awarenesses.
So I think I understand you're asking, how could this resource help a coach become more self-aware?
Yes.
And there's a lot of books out there about here's me and here's what happened to me, and now take this and go use it to fix your life. And this is not one of those books. This is a resource about what the world has experienced. And I have a fabulous research partner who's a PhD and an amazing researcher who helped with the book. And so when someone picks this up, they're going to find that while I've put it together in a format and kind of laid out that we're not dealing with personal stories here only. We're dealing with a systemic global challenge. And it's a health challenge because it impacts humans in so many ways, physically and mentally, from very young ages. And so to gain self awareness is a real gift that coaches offer to their clients. And we want to have that self awareness first. And so the book is helpful to create self awareness. And there are questions at the end of each chapter. While there's a story at the beginning of each chapter, it's primarily just to open our hearts and minds to what's coming next. Because humans are wired to be moved by and engage in stories. But we want to recognize as wellness professionals and coaches that our stories are not the end of everything, and to have a broad, informed perspective about what's happening in the world and what's happening for our potential clients. And so I think that's where maybe having a resource like this can add to your toolkit.
Yeah, it was so well done and well thoughtful because you zoom in at the beginning, there was an anonymous story, usually at the beginning of each book, with a personal incident. Then you bring it out. Then there is more research about the society, and as you mentioned, global statistics, and among different cultures. So many different cultures you have in here. And it really drives home the humanity of this book. And one of the things that I also really loved, in top of the reflections, were, you know, reading this book and getting towards the later chapters, I was like, how in the world is this going to be positive? How can one person make a change? Because this is such a daunting problem. And the way that you work with the reader to first assess themselves on an individual level, spark conversations with their own family, and then in an organization, and then really demonstrate laws and policies. And I loved all the nonprofits you shared that have gone into agency and making change. It really does show that there is hope and that one person can make a difference.
And we can take the same kind of pathway as we're coaching our clients, as we're working with our clients, as we're working to help them have the fullest life that they can, and healthiest, be their healthiest best. To start from me, myself, and I, right? And so to gain that self awareness individually. And then we move into the we space in the conversation with the client. There's power there to create change. And then we move on into the world space. And that's I'm creating change by how I think and speak, not only to myself and to my client, but how I bring my voice to my greater community, whether it's a faith community or a learning community or, any kind of different community I'm a part of, um, to be somebody who's got the strength to own my voice in that community and take a stand for what's important to me means that all of us can have a global impact, right? One voice, one comment, one thought at a time. If it's a thought in the domain of making the world healthier and safer for everyone.
And You also, to me, this was a huge example again, just of the courage to share and the courage of even compiling this research, right, and making it universal and really having the heart and the emotional presence. It takes a lot emotionally to write a book like this, mental state of mind, just reading everything. And so to really, it's really so well composed, so well written, so well researched. It also, to be honest, is very inspirational to me not to be scared of writing of these topics or having this conversation and creating more conversations like this, especially for other fellow health and wellness coaches. You know, these topics are, they impact everyone. Everyone has known, I will venture to say, right? Everyone has known someone who has been impacted by this, either directly or indirectly. And so it's so important to, at least, like you mentioned with a reflection conversation, start a conversation and start with a reflection, and that begins with ourselves.
Yeah, and whether it's like We're All Like This, a book by Stephen Ing, or there are many resources out there that are just, let's talk about sex and let's talk about gender and let's talk about how we treat each other as people. And it impacts somebody. The research has shown that it's not harmless to live in a culture that objectifies people. And so where we want to have conversations with clients is, to help them see what we know now about what's healthy for us. And we do that with diet and exercise and uh, social relationships. And we know that people we hang around can be bad for us or good for us. And I mean, there's, we know it in terms of learning. So there's so much that we know, and we know quite a bit about how to keep people healthier and safer when it comes to gender relationships. And I think having it all laid out in one place, or at least just a start, because it's not meant to be the be all and end all. It's meant to start conversations.
Yeah. And the voice, it's such a nurturing voice. So just on a personal note, my parents grew up in India. They came here in the 1970s. And not only is there such a generation gap because of the technology, there is a culture difference. And, they're very well educated. But there were certain topics, and still in our communities and our religious communities, that how do you talk openly about issues with sex, to 10-year-olds, to 12-year-olds, to 15-year-olds, when you know what they're going to hear through pop culture and experience through their friends in high school, but it's still one of those things, at least from personal experience in my community, that people just don't talk about. This was such a comfort knowing that, okay, this is normal. This is so much evidence behind it. It is a universal experience to be aware of. And so for across culture, like you had mentioned with your research, this is such a voice of hope and reason and awareness to anyone from any ethnic community, just sharing that universal human experience.
And it's so necessary because we also have a culture now that's increasingly driven by access to technology and global uh, global access. And when we have AI that's generating porn, when we have a large percentage of fourth grade kids exposed to hardcore porn, when we have uh, popular culture influencing family, um, we can't stop the presence of influences that would deepen what I call old normal, which is this culture that allows the mistreatment of other humans. But we need to be aware that if we're not guiding and having conversations at any age, um, then we're going to keep sitting in old normal, and we are not going to be able to create a future that's really safe for people.
Yeah. I loved also there was a portion in the book you had talked about backlash to the Me Too movement as well. And I wanted to ask you, there's so much that you have have gone through as an author. And, what has there been any unexpected challenges you faced either with writing this book or after the publication of it?
Well, um, I'm not getting a lot of haters. I have some haters, and if you take a stand for something, there are going to be people who disagree and hate. Somebody left a kind of a 1-star review just to drop the review rating for the book, who I don't know that they read the book, but if they did, I think they read it as somebody who uh, couldn't relate at all, uh, because of being so much a part of the culture that objectifies. And so if you're invested in and rewarded by a culture that objectifies people, um, you might not like the book. And I don't expect everyone to agree with every single point of what I've written. I wrote the book to create opportunities for conversations. Um, and I had mentioned in the book that I have been a victim of gaslighting, of harassment, and have had security violations, but I can't directly trace those to having released the book. So, one of the things that I want to mention is that people still separate conversations around gender equity, gender violence, and the rest of life, right? There's not a sense that these are all the same thing. I mean, how we treat people in the workplace, how we treat people in our families, how we treat people in our communities impacts them, and as a result it impacts all those places in the world that we're in. And so when we're talking about increasing profitability, or when we're talking about making better community organizations, or making kids sports safer, or more fun, or whatever the domain, these conversations that we're not having are impacting negatively, right? We need to start having the conversations, and be courageous about making sure that those are included.
And that goes back to what you said at the very beginning about the whole person approach, especially as a coach, and not, really have that integrity and authenticity and values in all domains of life, and not to compartmentalize in terms of profitability or workplace hierarchy. Because if it's objectification, like you said, in one, it just, how can someone be comfortable with it in one circumstance and not in the other?
Well, and that it's a loss in every circumstance. We're losing money. We're losing effectiveness. We're losing as a society, and as groups, and as families. We're losing health when we don't bring this into the conversation.
Yeah, and you had mentioned, so with the conversation, the other thing that was eye opening to me too was reading about the media gender gap and lack of women representation for that, because that influences so much of our images. And it's, across industry, of course, there are gender gaps and pay wage gaps, but really you had gone into such nice detail about what goes on in the media and how that in order to really decrease objectification, the sexualization of women, we have to have more female voices being represented.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why Taylor Swift is so popular is I think that generations of people see her as the voice for them. And so you're right. We don't, I think, not just women, but anybody who doesn't feel represented and doesn't have a voice uh, is at risk of being, kind of being excluded as part of how we run the world. So, you know, the, I don't want to get into politics, that's not, or religion or anything, but I want to say when their voices are not heard, it does change how the world is. And if we like the way the world is today, and we want to keep seeing half the sky uh, really not living their full potential because of the way we treat them, we'll keep doing what we're doing.
Right. What have been some of the positive outcomes you've seen from your book?
Oh, well, I think that for me, the things I hear are when people reach out to me and say, I bought this book for every woman in my family, um, because it changed how I see myself. And it took away shame, and it helped me recognize that there's hope to create some safety for the next generation. That's that's positive. And I think the other thing is, um, I'm still really under resourced and limited in how quickly this gets out. So it's kind of grassroots. The thing I've done is lowered the price for the ebook to under a cup of coffee at McDonald's. It's pretty low, and make it really accessible. But um, I had some people say, you need to enter this book into some book awards because it's really good. So they kind of made me do it, and I entered it into international book awards, and I was really touched and honored that it was recognized as one of the top nonfiction books in 2021. And then I entered it in a Pinnacle Book Awards, and it was recognized as the top women's interest book in 2022. And they get a lot of people that submit books, and I don't like to do that stuff. I'm not all about getting attention for myself, but for the topic, if people can benefit from the book, I think the most rewarding thing I've had is individual stories. I had a guy who got the book for his wife who was being harassed at work as a token of his respect for her and her desire to navigate the situation in a way that would be a win for everyone. And after reading the book, she decided to report the sexual harassment going on and take it as high up as she could and leave the organization because their response to her reporting indicated that they're not ready to deal with they're not dealing with it. They're seeing it as a, a way to protect, they're seeing it as a way to protect those in power and not to engage organization wide to make sure that everyone's safe. But she was really at a place of feeling stuck. And he said the book helped her a lot, and it was a good investment for $20 at the time. So when I hear stories like that, I feel like, okay, maybe it was worth the time to do the writing.
Yeah, there's so many books out there, especially with AI coming out. And so, if you could read a book, when I look for books to read, I try to look for ones that are very spiritual or things that can change your life. And yours was very touching and transformative. Definitely worthwhile. Definitely has the ability to change life by changing perspective, like you said, on how we view ourselves. And so, to anyone listening, I am highly recommending this book.
Let me give you a couple takeaways for the listener. If you just want to think about yourself, um, what I want to encourage you to do, whether you get the book or not, is take the time to understand your history, who you are, where you come from, and your own life. Take the time to explore your emotions around this topic and what comes up for you. Get comfortable with language that you need to address your own needs. Um, be be comfortable with your body, and if you need to engage with a professional, another wellness professional, whether it's a counselor or someone, to really be able to be fully alive, all that you are, and to practice the self care that you need to have for yourself to foster safety in your life and your relationships. and to explore and develop habits that are going to encourage you and keep you on track for the way that you want to show up in what I call new normal, right? That's the safer world for everyone. At the professional level, I want to encourage you to do a little bit of work on what kind of biases you may have or what kind of stories you may have regarding talking about sexual safety or equity in the world. I want to encourage you again to look at how you set standards to maintain safety and confidentiality for your clients, to follow ethical guidelines and stay in your lane for your profession. I want to encourage you to learn more about trauma informed care and maybe be a voice of courage for your profession to demand that it rise to standards for new normal. And as a part of the world, as a part of the person who has a voice in the world, when we say, "What can I do?" We can do the one thing that comes to us, right? So thank you, Jess, for doing your one thing and putting me on your podcast. I appreciate it. But you were familiar with the quote from Edmund Burke, who said, "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." And can I say, Edmund, let me add from Christine Rose, men and women, right, to do nothing. That the world that continues to tolerate and look the other way and not bring out into conversations gender-based and sexual discrimination and violence is dominated by evil, and we're allowing it to triumph. And so if we keep silent, we're part of the problem. And so as part of a person who has a voice in the world, let me remind you that change only happens through conversations. If you don't talk about it, it's going to stay the same way it's always been. So I encourage you to start them, engage in them, follow through with conversations. Share the book if you think it might benefit someone, as it is destined. I designed it to be a conversation starter and to make you a little more comfortable with those. And I just want to say thank you to those of you who are already doing that. I want to say thank you to listeners who have already bravely stepped into their leadership voice for creating what I call new normal, this world that's safe for everyone, that's healthy for everyone, and keep on stepping.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you here to talk about this topic and to talk about your book.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you and value your feedback, so please subscribe and write a constructive review. If you'd like to be informed of new episodes and offerings and resources for coaches, sign up for our email list at www.centerforhealthandwellnesscoaches.com. Sending you warmth and light.